At 13, I called an ambulance for my mother, but she disappeared from the hospital and left me homeless. When she returned, she gave me an ultimatum. Either I go with her, or never again. My choice then changed everything. Before watching the video, I ask you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and write any comment. The most interesting comment will be included in the next videos. Thank you to each of you. Enjoy watching. I'm Alex, 13 years old, male. If I had to sum up my childhood in 2 words, it would be mom. Not my mom, not our mom. Just mom, as if she were the entire world. For years, that's what she was. She could be fire and storm in one breath, then soft and dire the next. And even when I hated her chaos, I clung to it, because she was the only constant I had. When she said we were moving, it wasn't a discussion. She just dropped it one night while we were eating off paper plates, spaghetti sticking to the cheap plastic forks. "Pack your things, we're leaving tomorrow," she said like she was telling me the weather. I didn't ask where. Asking questions only ever got me silence or sharp words, and I had learned to keep my mouth shut. The next day we ended up in this room in the middle of the desert. The walls were thin, the carpet smelled like old cigarettes, and the landlord was this heavy-set man with gray stubble and eyes that never seemed to look at me, only at her. He wasn't exactly a stranger, Mom called him a friend, but to me, he might as well have been. He let us rent the back room, 1 bed, a couch. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like we'd been dropped in some forgotten corner of nowhere. I remember lying awake that first night, staring at the ceiling fan that wobbled like it might fall any second. Mom was smoking by the window, muttering to herself. I wanted to ask why we'd come here, why she always picked up and left just when I thought maybe we'd found a place to stay. But I swallowed it. Because if Mom was restless, I had to be steady. That's how it always worked. A few days later, everything cracked. I found her lying unconscious on the couch. At first, I thought she was sleeping, but the way her chest moved, shallow, uneven, made my stomach knot. I panicked, ran to the landlord, begged to use the phone. He shook his head, wouldn't even look at me. "Not my problem, kid." I sprinted out into the sun-blasted street, my lungs burning, my eyes stinging. I found a payphone a few blocks down, but when the operator asked for our address, my mind went blank. I didn't even know what street we were on. The shame and terror choked me, so I called the only number I remembered, one of Mom's friends. Between sobs, I got the words out. She called the ambulance for me. When I ran back, lights were flashing, neighbors staring, but Mom was gone. Just gone. That was the first time she disappeared. When I came back from the payphone and realized Mom was already gone, the world tilted sideways. The couch was still warm where she'd been. An ashtray balanced on the armrest with a cigarette half burned into nothing. The landlord was leaning against the doorframe like he'd been watching a show, arms crossed, eyes smug. "Ambulance took her," he said flatly, like he was telling me the mail had come. "Don't know where." Then he went back inside without another word. I stood there 13 years old, staring at that ugly brown couch like maybe if I waited long enough she'd materialize back on it. But she didn't. A neighbor, some woman I'd never spoken to, told me which hospital she'd been taken to. I ran there, legs shaking, lungs raw. By the time I found the emergency entrance, she was gone. A nurse told me, without much sympathy, that Mom had left against medical advice. Just walked out. No ID, no discharge papers, like she was escaping. For weeks I stayed with one of Mom's friends, a woman named Lisa. She wasn't unkind, but I was clearly an inconvenience. I slept on her son's floor, lived out of the one bag I had brought. Every night I told myself Mom would come get me. She'd knock on the door, smiling that tired smile, and everything would slide back into place. But she never came. After about 2 weeks, Lisa pulled me aside in her kitchen. I remember the yellow tile counters, the smell of coffee and cigarettes. She said softly, "Alex, honey, you can't stay here forever. We've done what we can." My heart sank to my stomach. I tried my sister next. She was older, living with a friend, and that friend's mom. I showed up at their door, clutching my bag like it was all I had left of myself. My sister hugged me, whispered she was sorry, but the friend's mom shook her head. "We just don't have the space." That night I felt truly homeless for the first time. Just drifting, no anchor. Then my aunt and uncle, people I hadn't seen in over a year, showed up. They weren't warm, they weren't excited, but they were steady. They drove me to their house, gave me a bed, fed me dinner, and then a few days later they asked me something I wasn't ready for. "Alex, would you like us to adopt you?" I stared at them across their kitchen table. The question wasn't cruel, it wasn't even pushy. It was practical, like they were offering me a way off a sinking ship. I nodded, because what else could I do? There was no other way out. But the whole time, a voice inside me whispered, "She's coming back." And she did. A month later, Mom appeared at my aunt and uncle's front door like a storm that had blown in without warning. It was late afternoon when she came back. I remember because the light was fading through the blinds in my aunt's living room, and I was doing homework at the dining table. The knock on the door was frantic, heavy, the kind that made your stomach drop before you even looked up. My aunt opened it, and there she was. Mom. Hair messy, eyes wild, lips chapped like she'd been walking through the desert sun for days. She didn't say hello. She didn't hug me. She just stormed inside like the house belonged to her. "Pack your things," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to slice through bone. "We're leaving." My uncle stood up, trying to block her path, but she shoved past him. She grabbed my bag from beside the couch, my only bag, the one I'd carried from place to place like a lifeline, and threw it at me. "Come on, Alex, now!" My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear her. For weeks I had begged the universe for her to come back. But this wasn't how I imagined it. She wasn't soft or apologetic or even relieved to see me. She was furious, like I'd done something wrong by being there. I froze. "I said pack your things," she screamed, her voice breaking. "You don't belong here, you belong with me." My aunt tried to calm her down. "She's safe here," she said gently. But that only lit Mom up more. She turned on her, spitting words like venom. "Safe? You think he's safe with you? You think you can take my son from me?" I ran. Out the back door, through the yard, my feet slamming against the dirt. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the garden. My lungs were burning, my whole body shaking. My aunt and uncle followed, their voices calling after me, but all I could hear was Mom's screaming echoing from inside. She came after me, eventually. Her face was wet, tears or sweat, I couldn't tell. She pointed at me, her hand trembling. "If you don't leave with me right now, Alex, you'll regret it. You're betraying me. Do you hear me? Betraying me." And then the words that burned themselves into my brain. "Either you come with me now, or you'll never see me again." I was 13. I didn't know how to choose between my heart and my survival. But I knew one thing. I couldn't live on the streets chasing her shadow. So I stayed. I stayed in that yard, shaking, watching her eyes turn from fury to something colder. She left, slamming the gate behind her, her voice carrying down the street. "You'll regret this, Alex! You'll regret it!" And I really thought she was bluffing. I stood in that yard till the sun went down, waiting for her to come back. Every sound of a car on the street made my chest tighten. Every shadow across the fence made me hope. But she didn't come. That night I lay awake in my aunt's spare room, staring at the ceiling. My bag sat in the corner, half open, like it was holding its breath, too. I kept replaying her words over and over. Either you come with me now, or you'll never see me again. The thing about being 13 is you don't realize how final words can be. You think adults bluff. You think they'll cool off, change their mind, come back with open arms. I told myself she'd return once she had a house, a job, some kind of stability. That's what I shouted to her when I ran out into the yard. I thought she'd hear the logic in it. But days passed, then weeks, no calls, no letters, not even a message passed through a friend, nothing. She disappeared like she'd never existed. At school, I pretended like everything was fine. When kids asked why I was living with my aunt and uncle, I shrugged and said my mom was busy working. It was easier than admitting the truth, that she'd given me a choice no child should ever face. And I'd chosen survival. My aunt and uncle didn't talk about it much. They didn't press. They gave me food, clothes, a bed. They signed the adoption papers without fanfare, sliding them across the table for me to scribble my name. It was supposed to be a new start. And in some ways, it was. But in my head, I was still waiting for her shadow to reappear at the door. I clung to tiny details like they were lifelines. The sound of her lighter flicking open. The smell of her cheap perfume. The way she used to hum to herself when she thought no one was listening. I was terrified of forgetting those things, because forgetting felt like betrayal, too. But she stayed gone. And the silence was its own kind of violence. It wasn't until I turned 15 that the silence finally broke. One afternoon, a letter arrived. My aunt handed it to me carefully, like it might explode in my hands. The handwriting on the envelope was jagged, rushed, but I knew it instantly. Mom's. Inside was page after page, her words spilling everywhere, crooked and uneven. But what gutted me wasn't the length of the chaos. It was the opening line. Alex, I forgive you for leaving me. Not I'm sorry, not I love you, not I missed you. She forgave me, like I was the one who'd walked out. I sat on my bed staring at that letter until the words blurred. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. Forgive me. That was her opening line. Not a single acknowledgement of what she'd done. Vanishing, leaving me to sleep on other people's floors, making me feel like luggage no one wanted to claim. No, somehow I was the one who needed forgiveness. Page after page it was the same twisted narrative. She wrote about how hard things had been for her, how she couldn't handle the doctors or the hospital, how the world was against her. She even wrote that she understood I was confused when I didn't leave with her that day in my aunt's yard. But she circled back to the same poison every few lines, how I had abandoned her, how I had chosen strangers over my own mother. I was 15, old enough to know gaslighting when I saw it, even if I didn't have the word for it yet. Old enough to feel the rage building like fire in my throat. So I tore it up. Every page, every word. I ripped it until the pieces were so small they looked like confetti. Then I walked to the kitchen, dumped them in the trash, and slammed the lid down so hard my aunt came in asking if I was okay. I told her I was fine. I wasn't fine. That night I dreamed of her voice again, sharp and cold in the yard. Either you come with me now, or you'll never see me again. And for the first time I realized she'd meant it. She hadn't been bluffing. She'd cast me out, and now she was rewriting the story to make herself the victim. Here's the thing, though. Something cracked open in me after that letter. For years I'd been waiting, half alive, holding my breath for her return. That letter was the first time I thought, Maybe I don't want her to come back. Maybe she doesn't get to. And that's when the idea of revenge, my kind of revenge, started to form. Not the flashy kind, not slashing tires or screaming matches, but something quieter, sharper, something that would last. I started keeping a journal, writing everything I remembered, every move, every disappearance, every word she threw at me. I wrote it all down so her version couldn't replace the truth. If she wanted to pretend I'd betrayed her, fine. But I would build a record that showed exactly who had betrayed who. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And it was the beginning of me taking back my story. The journal started as scraps of memory, but it grew fast. I wrote about the desert room with the wobbling ceiling fan, about the landlord who wouldn't let me use his phone while Mom lay unconscious. I wrote about Lisa's kitchen with the yellow tile, about my sister whispering she couldn't take me in, about the night in my aunt's yard when Mom's voice cracked as she screamed betrayal at me. I wrote it all. It wasn't just a diary, it was evidence. Proof that I hadn't abandoned her. She'd abandoned me. Proof that her story wasn't the truth. Every time I wrote, the rage turned into something cleaner, sharper. By the time I was 16, that journal was thick, its pages bent and wrinkled from how many times I'd gone back over them. My aunt knew I was writing, though I don't think she realized how much I was pouring into it. She'd just say, "If it helps, keep going." My uncle, on the other hand, glanced at it once and muttered, "Good. Don't let her twist you up." And then came the chance for revenge. I found out Mom had resurfaced in town, not to see me, not even close. She was telling people she'd let me live with my aunt and uncle because I needed stability, like she was some noble martyr. Worse, she was saying I'd chosen them over her. The same twisted story from the letter, now spoken out loud, shaping how others saw me. So I did something I'd never done before. I didn't run from her lies. I walked straight into them. One Saturday, she showed up at a cousin's birthday party. I hadn't planned on seeing her, but there she was, smiling like nothing had happened, holding court at the picnic table with relatives who'd half believed her stories. When she saw me, her face flickered, but she didn't stop. I pulled my journal out of my backpack. I hadn't meant to bring it, but some part of me must have known this day was coming. My hands were shaking, but I opened it right there in front of everyone. I started reading, word for word, about the unconscious night in the couch, about me running blocks to find a payphone, about how she'd stormed into my aunt's house and screamed that I'd betrayed her. I read until the air was heavy and quiet, until even the kids on the swing set had stopped to listen. Her face went pale, then red. She tried to cut me off. "Alex, that's not how it happened." But I kept going. My voice was louder now, steadier, years of swallowed silence finally breaking loose. By the time I closed the journal, everyone was staring at her, not me, her. And for the first time in my life, she looked small. That was my revenge. Not screaming, not breaking things, but putting her lies out in the open and drowning them with the truth. The silence after I closed the journal felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. My cousin's backyard, which had been buzzing with laughter and music, was dead quiet. Plastic cups of soda sat untouched, balloons bobbed in the breeze, but all eyes were on her, on Mom. Her face twisted, not into shame, but into something wild. She shot up from the picnic table so fast her chair toppled backward. "You think you can humiliate me!" she screamed, pointing at me with a trembling hand. "You ungrateful little brat! You're making up stories to make me look bad." Nobody moved. Not my aunt, not my uncle, not the cousins who'd been halfway to the cake table. Everyone just stared, and the longer the silence stretched, the more frantic she got. "You don't know what it's like," she shouted, voice breaking, pacing like a trapped animal. "I did everything for you, Alex. Everything. And this is how you repay me? By siding with them?" Her hands were shaking so violently she knocked over a plate of chips. She picked up a soda can and hurled it at the fence, the spray hissing out like her rage needed a sound. Then she turned those wild eyes on me again. "You're a traitor! A traitor to your own mother!" And here's the thing. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I didn't shrink back, didn't run. I just looked her dead in the eye and said, "No, I'm done letting you rewrite my life." The words hit her harder than anything else I could have done. She froze. Just for a second, but long enough that I saw it. The crack in her armor. Then she grabbed her purse, shoved past two relatives, and stormed out through the gate. Tires screeched minutes later as her car tore away from the curb. The yard was still silent. Finally, my uncle muttered, "Well, guess that clears a few things up." A nervous laugh rippled through the family, but no one really knew what to say. That night, lying in my bed at my aunt's house, I felt lighter. Not fixed, not healed, but lighter. For years I carried her shame like it was mine. But standing there with my journal, reading the truth out loud, I had handed that weight back to her. She never forgave me for it, I know that. But the difference was, I didn't need her forgiveness anymore. After that day in my cousin's backyard, everything shifted. Mom vanished again, but this time it didn't feel like a cliff I was falling off. It felt like a door slamming shut. For weeks, relatives whispered. Some called to say they had no idea what I'd gone through. Others avoided me altogether, like being around me meant choosing sides. But I didn't care. The point wasn't to win them over. The point was to stop living under her version of me. My aunt found my journal on the kitchen table a few days later. She didn't read it, just set her hand on top of it and said, "I'm glad you're not keeping it all inside anymore." My uncle, never one for big speeches, clapped a hand on my shoulder one night and said, "You did good, kid." That was all I needed. I'd expected guilt to come crashing in, the way it always had when I defied her. But it never did. What came instead was space. Quiet, steady space in my head where her voice used to rattle around. Mom didn't contact me again for years. No letters, no phone calls, no dramatic reappearances. And for once, I didn't sit awake waiting for her. I built a life. I finished high school. I started working part-time, saving up for things that were actually mine. I even let myself imagine a future without her shadow always looming over me. And when I turned 18, I burned the last scraps of her letter. The pieces I hadn't torn up enough to scatter were still stuffed in the back of a drawer, yellowing with time. I took them outside, lit a match, and watched the smoke curl into the night sky. My aunt stood at the window watching, but she didn't say a word. That was my revenge, really. Not just reading the truth out loud in front of everyone, but living a life she couldn't control. A life where her ultimatums, her vanishing acts, her twisted words didn't define me anymore. She wanted me to believe I had betrayed her. She wanted me to spend my life begging for her forgiveness. Instead, I gave her the one punishment she never saw coming. I stopped waiting for her. I never went looking. I never answered her silence with my own. I simply chose not to be hers anymore. And that was enough. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel and like it. You can also watch more shocking stories in the playlist.